You ever have one of those stories that sounds funny now, but when it happened, it nearly froze your heart? That's how this story goes. When I was a kid, I used to sleepwalk. Nothing too unusual, right? Except for one thing. I didn't just wander around my house. Sometimes, I'd wake up outside in the middle of the night. And when I say outside, I mean outside. Barefoot, cold pavement under my feet, streetlights flickering, the kind of silence that hums in your ears. We lived in Decatur, Georgia. Not the safest place back then. A few houses on the street had bars on the windows. People double-locked their doors. But little 9-year-old me, apparently, I thought wandering around half asleep in the middle of the night was perfectly fine. I'd wake up on the porch sometimes, or sitting on the curb, just there. No memory of how I got out. I'd rub my eyes, feel the humid night air, and realize the front door was wide open behind me. I used to think, wow, lucky nothing happened. But now that I'm older, I realize just how dangerous that was. My mom would scold me every time I told her. "You need to lock your door when you go to bed," she'd say, not realizing that I was asleep when I left it wide open. Sometimes, she'd even push a chair against the door, but it didn't matter. Somehow, I'd always find a way. That was until that night. The one I'll never forget. It was summer. I remember because I could hear cicadas buzzing outside. The air was heavy, and I'd left my window cracked open because my small room didn't have air conditioning. I went to bed as usual, brushed my teeth, said goodnight to Mom, and drifted off while listening to the hum of a box fan at my bedside. The next thing I remember is waking up, standing. My forehead was pressed against the cool window glass, and my hand was holding back the curtain. It was pitch black outside, except for the faint orange glow of the streetlight across the road. I blinked. My eyes started to adjust, and that's when I realized there was someone standing in our yard. At first, I thought maybe it was a neighbor or someone walking a dog. But no, this person wasn't moving. They were standing completely still. Then I noticed something strange. The man had no hair, none, no eyebrows, no beard, not even the shadow of stubble on his head. His skin looked pale and almost shiny under the streetlight. And he was staring directly at me. At first, I thought maybe he couldn't see me because the lights were off inside. But then he started moving closer, one slow step at a time, tilting his head as if trying to understand what he was seeing. I froze. I remember my thoughts being slow, foggy, like my brain hadn't caught up with what my eyes were seeing. Then it hit me all at once. This wasn't a dream. I was awake. And this man was walking straight toward my window. He didn't look angry or threatening, more confused, like he was the one surprised. But his expression, that blank, curious look, made it even more terrifying. He kept coming closer until his face was only a few inches from the glass. And then, he leaned forward. Our eyes met. For a split second, it felt like time stopped. Neither of us moved. I could see the tiny reflection of my own face in his dark eyes. Then, something in me clicked. I came fully awake. I realized what was happening, and I screamed. Not just a shout, a full, primal, terrified scream that I didn't even know I was capable of. The man's eyes went wide. He jumped back like he'd just been electrocuted. And then, what happened next was so strange that I still laugh about it to this day. The man, this tall, hairless stranger, let out this high-pitched shriek that didn't match his size at all. It was like a startled cartoon character. He flailed backward, tripped over his own feet, did a clumsy tumble in the grass, scrambled up, and started running down the street. In this weird zigzag pattern, like he thought someone was chasing him. Meanwhile, I was still frozen in place, screaming non-stop. My mom burst into my room, half asleep and panicked. She flipped on the light and grabbed me, shaking me by the shoulders. "What's wrong? What happened?" All I could do was point toward the window. He was there. But when she looked, the yard was empty. Mom sighed, said something about bad dreams, and hugged me until I calmed down. But I knew what I saw. That man was real. When the sun came up, everything felt like it might have been a nightmare. The window looked normal, the grass outside untouched. Mom made breakfast, but I could barely eat. I kept glancing at the window, half expecting that bald face to reappear. Then, when Mom went to open the front door to get the paper, she froze. There, lying on the porch, was a screwdriver, and the door frame, right near the lock, had fresh scratches, like someone had tried to pry it open. That's when my mom's face went pale. She didn't say a word for a few seconds. Then she turned, locked the door again, and said quietly, "We're calling the police." They came, took a look, and said someone probably tried to break in but got scared off. I wanted to tell them about the man's face, about how close he was to my window, but something stopped me. Because the truth was, even though I was terrified, there was something about him that seemed just as afraid of me. After that night, my mom nailed the window shut and replaced the locks. I stopped sleepwalking soon after. Maybe because deep down, my body knew it wasn't safe to wander anymore. We never saw that man again. No one on the street ever mentioned anything. Sometimes I wonder if he thought I was some kind of ghost, a little kid suddenly coming alive and screaming in the dark. And now, whenever I tell that story, people laugh. I laugh too, at the image of that man tumbling and zigzagging down the road like he was dodging imaginary lasers. But every now and then, late at night, when the world is quiet and the wind makes the curtains move just slightly, I still feel that chill, that feeling of waking up, seeing eyes staring back at you through the dark, and realizing maybe, just maybe, you weren't the only one out sleepwalking that night. There are moments in life when everything slows down, when you realize how close you came to the edge and how easily it could have all ended differently. For me, that moment came deep inside a US Navy submarine. I was active duty then, proud to wear the uniform, proud to serve. Our sub had just returned to port after a long patrol. Most of the crew had gone home. The atmosphere on board that night was calm, unusually so. A few of us were on duty, but because we'd been working non-stop for weeks, we were allowed a small break to bring our kids aboard for dinner. It was supposed to be an easy night. Family, laughter, a rare moment of normal life under the steel hull of a war machine. The mess deck smelled like macaroni, coffee, and cleaning solution. The usual submarine combo. The kids were having the time of their lives. They were laughing, climbing up on the seats, pretending to push buttons they weren't supposed to touch. We were tired, but happy. You could feel the relief in the air. After months underwater, you learn to appreciate small things. A good meal, your kids' laughter, the simple sound of voices that aren't from your watch rotation. Then, halfway through the meal, the intercom crackled to life. Light smoke in the engine room. We all froze. The words echoed through the steel corridor. A few seconds later, another announcement, sharper this time. Fire in the engine room. That phrase hits different when you're on a submarine. Fire is one of the most dangerous things that can happen on a boat like that. There's nowhere to run, nowhere for smoke to go. If things go wrong, the entire crew is in danger. But we're trained for this, over and over, day after day. And when the call came, instinct took over. The atmosphere flipped in an instant. The kids were hurried to safety as every sailor in the room stood up at once. I remember the commanding officer, our CO, was still topside. One of our senior enlisted guys rushed the kids toward the forward hatch. He didn't even hesitate. He literally started lifting the kids and handing them up through the hatch to where the CO was standing on deck. Our captain caught each one and set them safely on the pier. Meanwhile, the rest of us, those on duty, were already in motion. I turned down the passageway toward the engine room. The air was still calm, but you could feel the shift, that quiet before the chaos. As we ran, I noticed something strange. No one had grabbed a breathing mask, not one person. We're trained to do that automatically, but training collides with adrenaline sometimes, and people just react. So I turned around, grabbed a fistful of masks from the locker, and followed them down. We went through the hatch leading to the engine room, and instantly, the air felt thicker. A light haze filled the space. You could see it swirling in the beams of our flashlights. At first, it looked like smoke, but something was off. It didn't smell like burning metal or plastic. It smelled sweet, almost like syrup or sugar. It even tasted sweet when I breathed it in. That's when we realized what had happened. It wasn't smoke at all. It was atomized hydraulic oil. An oil pump had burst and sprayed a fine mist through the entire back half of the sub. It hung in the air like fog, invisible until you shined a light through it. Every surface was slick, coated with a thin layer of oil. And here's the terrifying part. Just a few feet away, a shipmate was preparing to light a cutting torch for maintenance. He hadn't heard the announcement yet. If he'd lit that torch, if he'd pulled the trigger just once, that mist, hanging thick in the air, would have ignited instantly. A single spark would have turned that room into a fireball. And all of us, charging in without masks, without warning, we'd have walked straight into an inferno. It's a moment that's hard to describe unless you've been there. When you realize how close you were to something irreversible. The timing was unreal. The emergency call had gone out seconds before he was about to start his work. Seconds. And when he heard the call, he stopped. He froze, torch still in hand. I still remember the look on his face when he realized what almost happened. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the kind of shock that hits you when you know you just avoided something that could have changed everything. The rest of the night felt surreal. Once we realized there was no fire, we began cleanup. The entire back half of the boat was coated in a fine layer of oil. Every tool, every pipe, every valve, it all had to be wiped down, cleaned, and checked. We replaced the faulty pump, ran diagnostics, made sure no electrical systems had been compromised. But beneath the routine, there was this quiet understanding among the crew. We'd just been seconds from disaster. There was no explosion, no damage, no injuries. From the outside, it was just another maintenance issue, another night on duty. But for those of us who were there, it was something else entirely. A reminder of how fragile things can be, even inside one of the most advanced machines ever built. Sometimes I think back on that night and wonder, what if the announcement had come 10 seconds later? What if no one had grabbed those masks? What if someone had panicked? Every decision, every sound, every movement mattered. People often imagine life in the military as full of loud moments, explosions, noise, chaos. But sometimes, the scariest moments are the quiet ones. The seconds between hearing fire in the engine room and realizing there isn't one. Yet, that night taught me something I never forgot. Training saves lives, yes, but so does timing and luck. We cleaned that oil, laughed about the sweet-smelling smoke, and carried on with our duties. But deep down, we all knew what almost happened. Sometimes the closest calls don't end with explosions or headlines. They end with silence, and a crew quietly grateful that they get to go home and hug their kids again. Sometimes the scariest stories don't start with screams or shadows. They start with something ordinary, something small. For me, it started with a car. A black, tinted Cadillac sitting in my parking spot. I had worked at the same job for 12 years, long enough for everyone to know that spot was mine. It wasn't officially reserved, but we had a system. Employees parked in the back so customers could have the front spaces. Still, that one corner spot under the light, that was my routine, my little claim in the world. Then one day, it was taken. And that simple, stupid thing, a car in my spot, turned into one of the most unsettling experiences of my life. It was early, about 4 a.m., when I pulled into work. The kind of early where the sky's still dark and the world feels half asleep. That's when I saw it. A black Cadillac, dark windows, sitting right where I always parked. At first I was annoyed, just pure, irrational irritation. Everyone who worked there knew that was my spot. I scanned the lot. Nobody around. The car was empty. No lights on inside. I told myself it was probably a new employee, or maybe someone from another shop in the plaza. Still, it bothered me more than it should have. When I went on lunch break later that day, the car was still there. When I went home, it was still there. The next day, I came in for the late shift, 1 p.m. to close, and there it was again. Same car, same spot. And by then, something about it just felt wrong. I don't know how to explain it, but the air around that car felt heavy. It was the middle of summer, southern heat, sticky and still. And every time I walked past it, there was this faint smell that hit me. Not strong, but strange. Sweet, sour, off. At first I thought maybe old food or garbage, but the more I passed it, the more my stomach turned. And then I remembered something my dad always told me. He was a Marine, then later a police officer. He used to say, if something feels wrong, it probably is. That voice echoed in my head every time I walked by that car. So one night, after my shift, I decided to do something about it. I didn't want to make a big deal out of nothing, so I called the non-emergency police line. The operator sounded calm. I explained the situation. A black Cadillac parked for several days. Windows too dark to see through. Strange smell, no one around. They said they'd send someone when they could. So I waited and waited. An hour passed, then another. By then, I was sitting on the curb, half thinking about just going home. I felt ridiculous. like some overreacting busybody. But then I thought about that spot, my spot, and how much this car had been bothering me. Petty or not, I decided to stick it out. Finally, 2 patrol cars pulled up. The officers looked tired, probably expecting to find nothing. "All right, Mom," one of them said. "You said this car's been here how long?" "3 days," I told him. "Maybe 4. Nobody's been near it." They walked around the car with flashlights. One leaned in close, trying to peek through the tint. Then he called out to the other officer, "Run the plates." I watched them from a distance, arms crossed, trying not to feel stupid. But the second that radio crackled back with information, everything changed. The officers' faces went serious. Their voices dropped. Suddenly, they weren't casual anymore. They asked me for my name, my manager's contact info, if I touched the car. They wanted to know if the lot had cameras. The whole atmosphere shifted in seconds. One of the officers quietly said something to the other. I only caught a few words. Something about a missing person alert. I didn't see much after that. They told me to step back. They called for backup. More units arrived, lights flashing, but sirens off. An officer draped police tape across the parking lot, blocking off the area. I remember the sound, the click of the trunk latch opening, and then the silence that followed. You could feel it, the kind of silence that hangs in the air when something awful has just been confirmed. Later, I learned that the car had been listed in an Amber Alert. It belonged to a missing 15-year-old girl who'd been seen last getting into her boyfriend's car several days earlier. They didn't tell me details, and honestly, I didn't want to know them. All I knew was that the smell that had haunted me for days had been something far worse than I could have imagined. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about that car. That same spot I'd parked in for 12 years was suddenly a reminder of how fragile everything is. And what haunted me most wasn't the horror of what happened. It was the timing. I kept wondering, if I'd called sooner, could something have been different? If I hadn't waited that extra day? There's no way to know. But that thought still sits with me. Now, whenever something feels off, a smell, a sound, a gut feeling, I don't ignore it. Because sometimes, the only thing standing between you and tragedy is a small nagging instinct whispering, something isn't right. So listen to it, even if it feels petty, even if it feels ridiculous, because you might just be the one who makes the call that matters. Sometimes your instincts are the only warning you get. If something feels wrong, listen to your gut. It might just save your life.